Hello and welcome to this videocast and podcast for subscribers to davidicke.com. Well, we're going to take some questions this week and next week on a great variety of subjects. And I'm going to start with a subject that a number of people have asked about, and quite right that they should, and that is trade agreements. Now, anyone that's not come across these trade agreements that are currently being negotiated in secret might at this point say, oh, he's going to talk about trade agreements. What a bore. Oh, goodness me. In fact, this subject is fundamental to the lives of every man, woman, and child on the planet. And when later I go into some of the detail of what these agreements will mean for everybody, it will blow your mind if you've not come across it before. Oh no, they'd never do that. They are doing it. And they're doing it, like I say, in secret, because the things they are putting into place are so extreme, so fundamentally tyrannical, that they want to get them as close as possible to a done deal before people know what's in them, and thus squeeze the time they have to basically go crazy when they see what this all means. The three agreements are this. There's the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, the TTIP or TTIP, I've heard it called. That's an agreement being negotiated between the US and the EU. Then there's the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP. That's between the US and the Pacific Rim countries, including New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and such like. And then there's CETA, which is between the EU and Canada. Now, they call them three agreements. They're not. They're one global agreement, given three names, to hide the fact that, well, it's a global agreement. And also to hide the fact, as I have been saying for all these years, there is a global force with a global agenda, and that is the force which is behind these trade agreements. I'll come more to that in a moment. What they are agreeing is to give virtually total power over everything to giant corporations. And as I explained in my books at length over the years, these giant corporations are ultimately, like the banks, owned by the same network. Thus, these trade agreements are giving control over virtually everything to this network I've been exposing for so long. One of the key things it allows corporations to do, all of them, because when I talk about one, I'm talking about all of them, they're all the same, is for corporations to take governments to a corporate court and get them to hand over vast amounts of taxpayers' money. If the court agrees, and it invariably will, because the same people are controlling that, if the court agrees that government policy, elected government policy, so-called democratic government policy, has had or is having a detrimental effect on corporate profits. I am not kidding. If environmental laws are put in place to protect the environment and to protect people from toxicity, from radiation, from all these things. A corporation can take that government to this court because those environmental laws to protect people by governments elected, at least in theory, by people, are having an adverse effect on corporate profits. And this is already happening with previous agreements. Now it's going global. Freedom of communication on the internet is right in the gun sights of these trade agreements. Expanding and making more extreme copyright laws and such like to stop people doing things on the internet that they do now. They are looking at food laws, laws to protect people from the adverse effects of food and stuff that's in food and how food's made and where it's made. Laws that have been built up over a long period. But, hold on a minute, that law you've just brought in that says we can't sell this kind of food because it's bad for people, that's bad for our profits. People aren't buying it anymore. Take you to court. And it's over this whole arena of regulation and what governments decide, sometimes on behalf of the people even, that these trade agreements are targeting. So regulations that are in place to try to protect people from the extremes of the financial system, i.e. look what happened in 2008, they are also, well, hold on a minute, you say we can't do this financially and we can't do that, that's affecting our profits. Then there's the aspects of these trade agreements which are about preventing, in effect, competition with state-owned industries. Thus, privatization of currently state, in theory, people-owned industries are also in the firing line of these agreements because that is affecting private corporations, so they say. And in Britain, really at the centre of this is the National Health Service. You know, the National Health Service is not being privatised by stealth year on year on year and being systematically destroyed by accident. It's by design. The more you make something not work that is in theory owned by the country, the more you're diluting opposition from people when you come along after these trade agreements and start privatizing it. Oh, well, it can't be any worse privatized than it is now. Yeah, because it's been run down on purpose, preparing for this. You look at all these laws that protect people, all these standards that are there to protect people. They're all the target of these agreements. In fact, there's simply one agreement. Workers' rights is another. Diluting and diluting safeguards for the way that people are treated by employers. It's a massive dismantling of everything that's been built up to protect the public and protect the freedom of the public from these gigantic corporations that are already far more powerful than governments. And this week we've had Obama and Merkel in Germany talking about it. And when these two, there are many others I could name as well, but when these two speak, it's the cabal, it's the global network speaking. They're just pawns, willing pawns, but pawns of this network that puts them into power so long as they do what they're told when they're in power, i.e. the network's in power. Headline, time for US-German leadership. Obama, Merkel pushing EU into unpopular TTIP free trade deal. US President Barack Obama wants to complete talks on the US-EU free trade deal before his term ends in January. However, while he enjoyed the warm support of German Chancellor Merkel in Hanover, public support for the highly secretive deal is waning. It's waning for one simple reason. As it leaks out, bit by bit, from the secrecy, what these trade agreements will involve, people are becoming increasingly horrified, quite rightly, by what they're hearing. I don't anticipate that we will be able to complete ratification of a deal by the end of this year, but I do anticipate that we will have completed the agreement, Obama said at the Industrial Trade Fair in Hanover during a briefing with Angela Merkel. The US president warned that time was ticking, claiming that things would become unpredictable once he is out of office. Nonsense! If Hillary Clinton replaces him, it will be business as usual, probably with all the others as well, when it comes down to it, rather than the rhetoric before. Merkel expressed support for Obama's call to speed things up. We should get a move on, she said. We all know the reproaches, worries and fears and what difficulties remain, but never mind what the public think and what people are concerned about. Do it anyway. My masters said so. Merkel argued that the trade deal would boost current living standards. That is what has been said by every other trade deal, and it's never happened. The only thing that's assured by previous experiences is that this trade deal, in fact, will cost enormous numbers of jobs that people currently have. So my request, said Merkel, is that you should do it, and then we can have great success this year. Have a party with their masters. Hey, we did it then. The TTIP's goal is to create the largest free trade zone in the world by reducing trade barriers between the US and European Union. This is the thing, you see. They talk about removing trade barriers as if it's a good thing. And they talk about free trade. It's free. You see that word, free? It's free trade. Who can be against free trade? But of course, it's not free trade. It's freedom to exploit trade. It's freedom to dominate trade. It's freedom to put the opposition out of business trade. That's what it's all about. And then there was this other story this week. Even the British government's own TTIP assessment says US-EU deal has lots of risks and no benefits. It's a Freedom of Information request that revealed this document, this assessment, by the Department for Business, Innovation and Skills in the British government. When the assessment found little reason to believe the EU-US investment chapter, as the deal is sometimes called, would give the UK significant political or economic benefits. It's not there to do that. It's to give corporations controlled ultimately by the same network the political and financial benefits and control benefits. The report also examined the issue of secret courts where investor-state dispute settlement proceedings would allow US firms, this is talking about this one, but it's the same with all the others. US firms to sue national governments. The authors argue that we would expect an EU-US investment chapter to be regularly invoked by US investors against the UK for governmental actions that would normally not be challengeable under UK law. See, the whole dynamic of power in the world is being handed to these corporations through these trade agreements currently being negotiated in secret. And that's why, this is a fundamental issue that needs to be addressed by everybody. Because if they don't, they'll deeply regret it not too far from now. Global Justice Now director Nick Dearden gave a withering assessment of the deal and of the government's analysis of it. He called it staggering that the government was pushing the UK into a system of, quote, secret corporate courts under TTIP, with almost no assessment of what the risks are for our policymakers or the taxpayer. What's even worse is that the one assessment that the government has commissioned shows that there are lots of risks and no benefit. The toxic trade deal promises, quote, harmful consequences for ordinary people and new powers and privileges for corporate elites, Dearden said. There's going to have to come a point, eventually, where those who you might call of the left or progressives and those challenging government impositions in the mainstream will have to grasp at last the fact that these things are not happening by accident. They're not happening purely through corporate greed. They are globally orchestrated to a global agenda, which I lay out in detail in the books and will do on the World Tour coming up. And therefore, things that are shocking and unbelievable, how could they do this, to those that will not see the global conspiracy and the connections, are perfectly explainable to people who do and can see it. So when the question is asked, why is the UK government not challenging this trade agreement and all the things that are in it for all the terrible things that are going to happen if it goes through, is because the same network that controls the trade agreement and the negotiation of the trade agreement is the same network that controls ultimately the UK government and the EU bureaucracy and the US government, the Canadian government, the Australian government, the New Zealand government. The penny is dropping for more and more people, but still vast numbers who really should know better will not let the penny drop on what we're actually looking at. So this is how these trade agreements fit into that structure. If you are going to control the majority, the mass of people, when you are the tiny few comparatively, you have to centralize decision making. The more points of decision making there are, the more diversity of decision making, the more devolution of decision making from the center, the less control you're going to have over it. So what you want for the few to control everyone else is to constantly centralize decision making until eventually there's just a tiny few at the global center dictating everything. That's what these trade agreements are moving us massively, massively towards. It's what the European Union's about. From countries making decisions, diversity, to a bureaucracy in Brussels making decisions. From governments all over the world making decisions, to these secret corporate courts deciding what can and cannot happen everywhere. And I say to those people of the left, the progressives, who will oppose these trade agreements as they are, but then dismiss and laugh at the idea there's a global conspiracy, wake the fricking hell up. Because you're never going to see what's going on and what these really mean until you do so. The structure that this is moving towards is a world government controlled by the few, world central bank controlling all global finance, world currency, cashless currency, no other currencies. That's why we go into the cashless society, as I've been warning about in my books now for 25 years. A world army imposing the will of the world government. Then there's these super states like the EU and others that are planned around the world, these unions at the second level. And all these areas of life controlling biotech, food, water, environment, energy, all of them will actually be controlled by private companies, private giant companies, in concert with the world government, which won't even be elected in truth, just like the European Union is a government that claims to have an elected parliament, got no bloody power. The bureaucrats call the shots. And therefore, these trade agreements can be seen in that context of pushing so much in a massive step towards this structure I'm describing. There are many other aspects to it as well. And the idea is that there will be no big business or medium-sized business or small business, just gigantic global corporations controlling everything. Now, look at these trade agreements in that context. And the reason that smaller businesses are constantly complaining that they are being destroyed and strangled by constantly increasing regulation is because the idea is to destroy them. Oh yeah, we must support small business, they say. It's the last thing they want. Small business is going to go. Medium-sized business, even what we now call big business, is designed to be absorbed, all of it, by these gigantic corporations. And what we've seen, for instance, is this process before our eyes. First of all, when I was a kid, we had little shops and small businesses. That was basically the foundation of everything. So then the grocer on the corner of the street, they were all basically absorbed, swallowed up by the great big supermarkets. Now, the supermarkets are in the process of being swallowed in terms of their business, etc., by gigantic corporations like Amazon, who are just now starting to deal in food. And so, if people just walk away and just let these trade agreements happen, then the world that we have been living in up to this point, even with all the impositions that we've had so far coming in all the time, deletions of freedom, we are going to go even from that into a whole new world of centralized corporate control, dictatorship, and no other word for it, fascism. And this is not by accident, but by cold, calculated design. And if people don't start opening their fricking minds to what's really going on, as opposed to, oh, it's all just corporate greed, that's all it is, then we're going to continue going down this road, because those that should be challenging it will be in denial of the fact that this global force is dictating their lives in ever greater detail, day after day after day. It's time to wake up to what's going on, or face the consequences very soon.